I wonder.
And you need to cross those bridges with people that don't necessarily like each other. And that because of that, it's slower to materialize. It's more difficult to deploy because there isn't a roadmap. The roadmap is your understanding of how to work within the ecosystem. And that's why you see a lot of technology providers ultimately starting to present their own stacks. Or if you know anything about IT procurement, you'll see the CDWs of the world actually showing a stack of their customers for IoT that you can plug in. But this is one of our challenges here. And as you start looking at this ecosystem, things that you want to be thinking about would be the stronger processors, smaller processors. Who are the chip designers? What chips are they designing so they can process more without burning your hand? And, I mean, I got my phone here in front of me. Do you realize how insane this thing is? I mean, just 5 or 6 years ago, if I was to put this in my hand would be on fire. The thing would melt. And that a lot of that has to do with the technology of chipset design, the technology of heat disbursement that it goes on so that we could do this. This is better than what I used to put in the training center of the training centers I ran back in 95 and 96. It's like 2 times, 3 times better. It's crazy. So you have that. You have the cloud storage. You know, so what are cloud storage systems? You have data management, data control systems. Now we're talking about the Hadoops of the world, and we'll get into a little bit more of this later on. Data analytics in general, and that's where you'll see a lot of PMs and a lot of BAs kind of moving deeper into the data analytics side of this ecosystem, where they can play by being able to look at the data that's coming in and make decisions. Then you have teaching tools, and those teaching tools are the tools that help the software learn, the ML and the machine learning tools, the tester flows from Google, and then ultimately the network, the bandwidth, and the security. And crap, I mean, Google's laying fiber right next to my house. My wife was all I was like, yeah, I'm getting Google fiber, thank God, it's coming, it's coming. All the infrastructure folks are out there, you know, solid and drilling away, putting that fiber in. But IoT is a part of that. I mean, and so you have to have that element as well. So as you look at these ecosystem pieces, as you start thinking about the projects that you may start to touch, you got to realize that there's going to be elements. It's not just going to be one box. It's going to, and you have to ask questions like, what's the security provision for this? How are the chips going to be able to deal with this? What's the regulatory issues associated with this? I mean, those are the type of questions that you have to be asking during the IoT transition. So next slide. So what this really means is that digital transformation, the digital disruption is not about a plan. You're just constantly planning. You're constantly rethinking, and the business models aren't safe any longer. So I learned a lot of this when I spent a year at Revive Technologies. We're a wearable device manufacturer that collected data around movement for kids with ADHD. And they just recently pivoted, and now they're going to try to sell their software to other device manufacturers. And that was within a 2-year pivot. It went from, we're going to sell B2C, we're going to sell the device. Oh, hey, we're going to sell the software as a subscription. Oh, no, or now we're going to try to become a digiceutical. Oh, now we're going to sell the software. So in a span of 2.5 years, I went through 4 different pivots. So the businesses aren't safe, business models aren't safe, products can't be static any longer. And so we have to start seeing, this is why you're getting some of this angst, the pace of change associated with how you operate internally, because your companies are now struggling. Are we a software system, or are we a data collection that sells our data? No, do we provide this type of information? Do we provide that type of information? What do we give away for free? What do we sell? And these questions are going to start coming up more and more and more, and you're going to start having these thoughts and conversations, even around the primary systems that you work in, because a lot of cases, the primary systems you work in are actually the competitive advantage by which your companies produce revenue. I mean, if you work for a financial management system, your loan origination software is your family jewels. If you work for a bank, you know, the website and the website data collection and the website access is some of the value proposition that you have. And then you get some examples here. Netflix is the shining star of DX, from CD company to manufacturer to the producer of content. I mean, it's crazy what has transpired there. And all that content's produced based on what they watch you watch. They watch you watch. And because they watch you watch, they build things based on what you're watching. And the tipping point is 4 shows. You get through 4 shows, you stay. You don't get through 4 shows, you go. It's crazy how they do that. And it could be a phenomenal show, but they're not gonna build another season because it didn't increase the number of people who purchased. And I'm sure they're watching, you know, trends around conversations. Bridgerton, which is a phenomenal show, right? How many people are talking about that as the most watched Netflix show? Season 2, bam, immediate, poof. But then I love this show called oh God, what's it called? The original OA. I love the OA show. It's a female producer, writer, director. It was amazing, but didn't produce enough new bodies. Didn't get produced. Recruiting, Monster, Indeed, Zip. They're all data. You guys have to remember when you're doing your resumes, it's all tag word data based, and that data is pulled out and extrapolated. So are you building your resume matching to that? The medicine side, we talked about that. So you got all of this, you see this. So if we move to the next slide, what you're really getting at, what I'm telling you is that the vision statement for you is that you want to be understanding that it's not about the trees. I'm talking trees here. If I talk about security, that's a tree. It's like one of the elements of the forest. If I talk about the processor, that's a tree. If I talk about, you know, security, I might have said that twice, but regulatory, that's a tree. What you have to be understanding in the IoT DX space is the forest. You got to think in the system's context. You have to make determinations of value, and then you have to adapt. And we'll talk about this adaptive challenging. To survive in DX, you have to become more adaptive. And I'll explain what that means. But this value idea becomes so important because this is where you have to start understanding business models. You know, the business model of selling data, the business model of selling advertising, the business model of giving X away for free and getting Y. You know, look at how much money you guys spend on building these huge websites, especially on the banking side. It's all free. It's free because without it, you're screwed. You're not going to collect a dollar worth of fee. You're not going to get a dollar worth of deposits, and you're not going to get any value any longer. So that website is mandatory for the business model to succeed. Now you're getting crushed because other banks, internet startup banks, are offering all that for free. Not just the website, but then the services, like the banking services, the checking services, and everything else on top of that. So you got to, as you keep looking through this, you start like looking at it's like an onion. It's got lots of layers on value, but it's tied back to those business models and understanding the trends in the business model. So an IoT person must be thinking in terms of how. Not how, excuse me. The IoT person has to be not thinking in terms of how, but thinking in terms of why. Why? Next slide, please. So this adaptive leadership thing is, as we start seeing this perpetual change, we're really looking at how do we thrive in the face of constant change? How do we start learning the essential from the expendable? And then how do we start accepting the fact that the way it is done should be changed and adjusted? We have to look at that. It's not just because it's done that way, should it really be done that way? And this applies to every organization. And what I like to say now when I do a presentation like this is that the status quo is an invisible killer, because we get too comfortable in the status quo. And a great example of the status quo as the invisible killer is the BlackBerry. The darling of any traveling IT professional in the early 2000s they're back and doing some interesting things, but got obliterated for years because they didn't understand why people would move to a toy like the iPhone. And people moved to it in droves. you know, the buffalo herds running rampant across the plains of the Midwest. It's insane. So you also want to be thinking about this is that change management, this is a technical problem, but digital transformation is an adaptive problem because it's adaptive issues. And I'll get into that in just a little bit. But this is the thing you want to be thinking about. The status quo is your invisible killer in the face of digital transformation. How do you attack this headlong? Next slide, please. So what you want to be thinking about as project managers is when are you dealing with a technical problem and when you're dealing with adaptive problem. IoT and digital transformation is an adaptive problem. I'll dig into this in the next slide, but technical problems, you know the problem and you know how to fix the problem. You just have to find the right people, the right tools. You got to manage the triple constraint associatedly, appropriately, and you'll get to the other side. Now, those were hard in the past because they were complicated technical problems, but they were technical problems. Really, what we're getting at now is adaptive problems. You don't know what the problem is, and you must learn to figure out what the solution to an unknown problem is. So next slide. So digging into this more, you can really start seeing this switch. And this is why you start getting this angst around heroic leadership. And so digital transformation is what has really started putting the pain on heroic leadership. Heroic leadership is, I know what the problem is. I have the strength to push the organization through. I will tell people what to do and I will direct them how to do it, and then they'll do it and everything will work out. It gets obliterated when you hit 2 and 3. 2 is, okay, it's a technical and adaptive. I understand the problem, but I'm gonna have to learn how to solve that problem. But really what we're faced now is there's a problem, but I don't quite know what the problem is. I can feel there's a problem. You know, we're having attrition in a certain group, but we can't quite tabulate what's going on. What's the problem? Well, we're gonna have to test and we're gonna have to research and figure out multiple areas. And there's not just one cause and effect. And once we start figuring out what the problem actually is, then we're gonna have to test different solutions to that problem. And as you can see, the locus of the work, where the work is done, the more it becomes an adaptive problem, the work is done by the people involved. And that's where digital transformation is. Digital transformation to be solved has to be solved within the teams that are working on those things that are going to be disrupted. The teams that are working with the customers who are going to be impacted by the disruption and using the system. The teams that are going to be seeing how the systems are working. But these teams have to get comfortable in the fact that they work in the fog. And this is one of the statements I talk to project managers about a lot. As I say, when you think about this, you got to say to yourself, I work with others to find what is yet unseen and execute in a fog around skills I might not have. Because that's heresy. Because we're all taught that I'm going to have lots of skills, I'm going to put those skills to use, I'm going to know what I'm doing. But the best skill in the adaptive problem is an understanding that you might not have those skills. And then how do you figure out how to get things done? Because project managers have a leg up in in the category of how to get things done. Because in today's world, in adaptive space, it's no longer about knowing how to do something. It's taking that next step to figure out how to get a team to work in this fog and actually get something done. So if you take the next slide. So to really get into this, you got to start realizing that of the stuff I just preached to you at the beginning, do you honestly believe that digital transformation is disruptive? So this is the problem. So you have to adjust the mindset. The order to handle an adaptive challenge, one of the problems is it's not behaviors and actions that are the problem, it's the mindset. So a perfect example of this is that Agile is an adaptive challenge. People attack it from a technical problem. I'm going to teach you how to do story points. I'm going to teach you how to use user stories. I'm going to teach you how to work iteratively. All right. Those are all practices. Those are all behaviors and actions. What nobody gets into, or very seldomly get into, is what is the mindset of somebody working in Agile? And do you have that mindset? Do you have the belief that this way of working is appropriate? So a lot of times with adaptive challenges, it's first and foremost to look at that. And one of the questions as you're going through a digital disruption is that does your organization understand and believe that this disruption is that catastrophic? Or are there people saying, no, this will pass? And I'll tell you, I've got that in my own organization. I truly feel that, we're on the waning side of the agile revolution and we're moving to the more adaptive challenges. Yet my company's knee deep in agile training. Just add more classes, add more practice classes, add more, classes that teach people how to do agile. And then the idea of, to be agile, do you have a framework and a process? So do you teach safe classes? Or because you're agnostic, do you only teach classes that are non-frameworks? We don't do Scrum and we don't do safe. So you start seeing how those can really, really impact your action into the marketplace. So if you start looking at these adaptive challenges as project managers, you want to be thinking what your value brings. Because remember, I talked to you about digital disruption is how do you define value, which is what is the business model by which your system. Remember, business models are internal. Don't just think about a business model and say, oh, if they have a business model, it's only external. No, you have users, and those users are customers. And because they're customers, they're going to spend their time. Any type of economic transaction you're giving something. And all of your users give their time to work within the systems that you provide. And really, these days, time is a bigger commodity than money. I mean, so you understand that you are working in a business model. The business model is you're trying to find ways to offer up systems that you can broker time. Oh, they're going to use my system because if they use it for 5 minutes, they're going to get 15 minutes of performance back. They're going to get 30 minutes of performance back if they work in the system for 10 minutes, because you want that return on investment for the scenario. So that's the business model you want to be thinking about. So ultimately, here is the idea of getting comfortable being uncomfortable and processing things through value, and then understanding it's about the mindset first before you can ever change the behaviors and the actions. So next slide, please. So now this is a kind of a nice little example of looking at technical problems versus adaptive problems. I'm going to give you 2 quick examples, and we're going to get back to IoT. First is COVID and work from home. My belief is that before COVID, work from home was an adaptive problem. Your bosses, your companies did not believe that you would be more productive at home. So a lot of times they had stipulations and regulations. And if you did work from home, there were rules and regulations by which you had to follow, and there were a certain amount of tools and some presence systems to show that you were actually there. Poof, COVID happens. Immediately, working from home moved from an adaptive problem to a technical problem. It was either work from home or die. That's a technical problem. It's simple. You do it or you don't. I don't have to learn about the problem. I don't have to learn about the solution. Just get everybody working from home. So all well and good, it happened. And it happened in a lot of cases for us who work in these knowledge working environments wonderfully. Now, post-COVID, not quite yet, what will happen? My gut tells me that it never changed as an adaptive problem, so that a lot of your employers are going to start slowly creeping back out of the woodwork. Oh, I don't trust that you can get your work done. I want you back at the office. We need more interaction. Now, I'm a big work in the office type of person because I got a personality. I like to talk, and I waste more time talking than I actually do because it's fun. But anyways, long story short is, that debate's going to happen. So that's the example of a technical versus an adaptive problem. The other example is weight loss. So weight loss is an adaptive problem. It's a mindset shift. So I am a perfect example of that. I probably lost 400 pounds and gained 450 pounds back. So I tried everything under the sun technically to lose weight. And as I'm learning more. It's about a mindset that allows me to live the actions and the lifestyle that of somebody who's of less weight than me. But I love food. Food makes me comfortable. Food makes me happy. And I'd rather, in some cases, be fat and happy than skinny and neurotic, because I had a tendency in my past to be skinny and neurotic. But long story short, they could see the mindset there. That's that battle right there. It's all well and good. I'm happy. Just keep eating. And also there's some other underlying things like time discounting and loss regret that get in the way there. But as you start fighting through these, you'll see the fact that how you can process these adaptive problems, and digital transformation hits all of these. All right, jump at it again. Slide change, please. So in the state of IoT today, still very confusing. No one piece fits all. Multiple elements coming together as we talk about. And then, there's always that search for value. So the impacts are on the vendors. So these vendors are going to be software vendors, hardware vendors, and the chip designers. So NVIDIA is a chip designer that plays a lot in IoT and digital transformation. Intel is a trip provider that works a lot in IoT and digital transformation. Then you have your service providers. You're getting more and more small consultant firms that are coming out and saying they deal with IoT. Now, here's the problem with service providers. Some do it on the tech level, some do it on the management consulting level. So you have to understand which one you're talking to. Then you have your enterprise IT. That's folks like you, okay, as you're working unless you work for a vendor or work for a service provider. What are we going to do? Why are we going to do it? What makes sense? And then finally, users. Here's the biggest problem, though, with IoT. Your users are bringing the stuff into the office because they want to use it. I mean, the proliferation of software systems that work off of, and apps that work off of IoT-based systems is crazy. The best example of this was SharePoint. SharePoint has some elements of IoT in it, but not much. But look at how it proliferated like bamboo within the organization with no real command and control because it was easy to adopt. And Amazon Web Services operated the same way. We're getting this situation where the users are bringing these systems into the organization, and you're going to be seeing more and more of that. But then on top of this, its problem is now they're going to be bringing with them the regulatory concerns and the concerns that they're going to be impacting and shaping decision-making, where Amazon Web Services and SharePoint did it, but some of these other IoT systems are going to be doing that, especially on the sales and marketing side. You start seeing some amazing things that these systems are doing, but then with JDRP, with the European data privacy standards, that could get you in trouble. So there's a lot of things to be considering here as you start looking into it, but putting it into that box, the vendor, the service providers, tech service providers, consulting service providers, enterprise IT, and then the users coming in from the back door, bringing stuff in, gives you kind of a picture. And if you hit the next slide, please. And so what you want to do here, and I'm not going to spend too much time on this, but this is part of the full stack. And if you hit one more slide, hit it again. And hit it again, and again. And keep going until you get to security and management. There you go. So this is the overall stack. And you can kind of see if I'm on the manufacturing floor, you have the component level. That's going to be your sensor level, the device by which the sensor is living on. And then I'm putting it into a gateway system. Then I have to get that data across the internet. Remember, this is heavy data. This is, it's like video, even worse. Some of it's unstructured and structured. If it's going to be in the cloud, then I'm going to have it in some type of platform, unstructured data platform like Spark or Hadoop. Then I'm going to interlink that with some type of analytics tool. And then finally, I'm going to have my services, as I talked about, the app-related services, or I'm going to have services related to the stuff that you can pull off your computer. And in some cases, people will sell that cloud as a self-contained system. Like you can buy into our IoT cloud that will process this information for you. If you then feed it up, if you can capture it, give it to us, and then we'll process it for you and serve it back down. And in a lot of cases, that's how a marketing automation system like Marketo works. You put in your customers, and then we'll track the customers in the cloud for you, and then output that data into your marketing systems. So that's how some of these will provide some hybrid infrastructure along with it. But you can see how each one could be a separate entity. The cloud could be managed by Amazon. The platforms could be managed by, the Hadoops and the Sparks of the world. You can be using different software to pull that stuff in. You could be using componentry from all different types of vendors. And then if you move to the next slide, this is the real deep picture of this. The services on top are going to be the why decision. And then the insights and analytics are when you start getting into ML and DL. Initially, this is where things like Crystal Reports played and other types of tools like IBM's SSPS. But now that's being replaced by DL and ML. Your cloud stack it's a great place to play, and it's going to continue to be important because it allows for quick provisioning. So there's some really cool opportunities there. And then you're getting into the deeper physical layer. And this is really the one place where physical layer changes are occurring. Outside of gigabit Ethernet, and really there's three ways to go: physical cable, Wi-Fi, or cellular. Cellular is at 5G. Ethernet's a gigabit Ethernet, and then Wi-Fi's 802.11 GDBA, whatever. But this field is definitely disrupting what might happen at that infrastructure level. So there are some infrastructure opportunities, and that's why Google's doing fiber. Why is Google doing fiber? IoT. It wants to watch you. It wants to watch all the stuff you're doing and collect it and use that. I mean, that's one thing we're forgetting. It might be free, but nothing is for free. Remember the business model. Google's business model allows us to access a lot of cool things for free, but it's really not free. There comes a cost associated with that. And if you ever watch Park and Rec, just ask Ron Swanson what happens. He shot the drone that was delivering something to his kid because he believed his kid did not have a digital footprint, but he did. All right, next slide. So this is the best slide from my perspective for the project management world. The first stack is customer experience. The second stack is service delivery. And the third stack is product management. This is your map to the DX world. So as you look at your customer experience on DX, this is where your sales and marketing automation comes to play. The more that you can dig deeper into the things that your customers are doing. And customers are buying more and more after extensive research. So your sales team is no longer out there introducing themselves for the first time. They're building relationships and justifying the information that these folks are pulling down. So the key is to get them when they're at that cycle just before they make the decision to connect in with them. And where are those touch points? So here you're getting into the world of relevance and you're getting into the world of awareness. So if you're a project manager working on new CRM or new marketing automation scenarios, you'll start seeing this is relevance and awareness. You're at the CX side of things, where customers are touching your organization and how are you going to let them touch you in certain ways that will ultimately allow you, then how do you know that and then pull that information in so you can get them to buy. Then on the service delivery side, this is where the vast majority of project managers will play. This is where the PMO is. And this is where the PMO can start using some of this stuff. Like how do you gather information on projects in real time to report on them without manual entry? We have some systems for that, but some of the systems are still relying on manual entry. This is where your automation of information comes into play. This is where you can start looking at ways to increase the efficiency of your systems, to increase the productivity of the basic operating processes. This is still kind of a gray area on the PMO side, but some of your operation and support systems and business support systems are already doing this. Trouble tickets, trends and trouble tickets. You know, you automate your trouble tickets, they find trends in certain users, and then 15 users pop out for training. These 5 people are doing the same thing over and over again. Please train them on these 3 things or they're going to cause you lots of pain. That's basically what some of these systems can do now. You know, you might end up being one of the, you know, I'd be like, gotta be on every list known to mankind. All right, so then the last one is product management. This is my favorite place. Projects are starting to become products. That's a trend in the SDLC world. This is about what type of access you're going to give for your solutions, the data that you're going to collect, the regulatory issues associated with it. This is where I spent a year or so of my life with the Revive product, where we had the device that vibrated, as I was talking about, but we collected that data. We initially packaged the subscription with the device. Then we pulled them apart and we started charging less for the device and more long-term for the subscription. And then we started weighing the different options associated with that. And this is also where you can do something I call margin magic. Margin magic is how do you get someone to buy something for a lot more than what it really costs? You know, cars, there's no margin magic in cars anymore, folks. We all know what a car costs. We can see the markup and we're just negotiating between pennies. Margin magic's when I can sell you something and you really don't know what the costs are. We used to be able to sell data for $5 and you guys, $5 a month. You guys are like, yeah, fine, that's good. Okay, I'll pay for that. It costs 2 cents. 2 cents. Apple is killing all of you right now. Oh, $1, that's nothing. It's probably half a penny a month. The profit margin on what they're getting for cloud storage is disgusting because they have margin magic, because digital transformation does that. And so as project managers, we want to start seeing where we can, you know, find and help if we're going to run this side of it, the product management side of the story. So anyway, it's kind of some fun things to look at as you start seeing where you might live within the whole DX space. Next slide, please. So the entire story is you got the data, The data doesn't lie. It doesn't cheat. It just is the data. Then you have the insights. The insights are the systems that see things and interpret things. But here's the problem. Those systems can make mistakes, especially if you're inputting the wrong data into them, especially if they're not taught appropriately, especially if they're unsupervised. And then finally, decisions, because look, at the end of the day, you still have to make decisions. This is the power. The power is no longer are we just, widget makers. We're decision makers. We're knowledge workers. We take information that we're getting, we process it, we have help in processing it, and then we make decisions. This is the IoT story. How can we give as much information that's processed and understandable to decision makers to make proper execution and proper decisions on things that are going on? Less time in planning, more time to be thinking. That's what we want. We want to get away from doing work to thinking work. Flip the slide. And so what makes data special? The biggest thing about makes data special is that it gets more valuable. You can mash it up. Like if I like, for instance, sometimes you could do overlays. Like, all right, I'm going to look at the school. I'm going to look at the school districts, and I'm going to look at the crime data. I'm going to overlay school districts to crime data, and I'm going to look down to see where I might want to move based on crime, school districts, other things. You can mash up this, so it's got extended value because it can grow. There's no limits. You just keep adding transactions. It's cheaper and cheaper to store this thing. And also, we as humans, we have a major limitation. Our major limitation is the amount of data we can process. And this is that's a thing that we have to be thinking about. The major disruption is that we have the ability now to pull in a lot of data and make interpolations off of that. But that's why data is special. It can be augmented. It can be mashed up. It can get correlated, and it grows in value over time because you're constantly refreshing. You're constantly updating if you're doing it right. So hit the next slide. So ultimately, what makes AI possible is data and computing power. Hit the next slide. So we don't have true AI, folks. There is no singularity. There's no system out there like Skynet or Vicky if you watched iRobot, or Legion if you watched the reboot for Skynet because they beat it, then they came back as Legion, another system. It was just inevitable. We don't have that. So what we have is we have the ability to teach machines how to learn based on trends. We teach machines how to learn based on the trends they're seeing, not based on cognition. That's the big thing, not based on cognition. Next slide. So when you think about cognition and you think about what's going on here, AI, ML, and DL, repetition, patterns, trends, prediction. Repetition, patterns, trends, prediction. I'm going to say something, serial killers are horrible entities. But one of the best ways to fight ever being victimized is change patterns. They're like mini ML systems. They watch. And they watch for patterns, and they love people with patterns because they can follow those patterns. Then they plan associated based on those patterns. Change your patterns. If you're jogging every day, change the time to jog. If you leave work at the same time, change the time you leave at work. You should do that anyway, just for protection, because that's these type of systems, they live on repetition, patterns, change, and prediction. So that's the thing you want to be thinking about. So if you see those opportunities where you can use ML to start deciphering certain patterns, this is where you can try for efficiencies. Well, this is great for gold plating. Okay, we have a software system. Let's look at the patterns and maybe, what are the 10 things that nobody's ever using that we all thought everybody would use? Let's stop updating that forever. And then, so with people, we think deeply. We need less data, but we have a ton of context, subtext, value, cause and effect. And we also have this instinct. We can see, you can feel it, the spidey sense, if you will, of a human being to see based on what you've experienced. And you get that sense. That's the part of the electrical impulses. Our brains, our hearts, our stomachs are all electrical, and we can feel that. With machines, it's a ton of data. They learn the patterns. There's no context. There's no subtext. There's no why. They answer how. Okay, this is what's going on based on all this trend. Weather systems, it's all AI driven. And here's a wonderful little side text to this. One of the biggest problems weather people have been having these days is temperatures. And you saw that with what happened in Dallas. And why that occurred is because we gathered all of our temperature data for AI for weather prediction through flights. And with the reduced number of flights, the fidelity of the prediction patterns reduced. So they were able to truly predict how bad Houston and Dallas were going to get because they didn't have the fidelity of those flights going back and forth constantly to do a better job. And that's been one of the challenges that weather forecasters have had at the temperature variant side to projecting the weather as of late. And I think it will continue that way until the flights start up. So that's what you want to be thinking about here. Now go to the next slide. So machine learning and deep learning are the two. Machine learning, teaching things how to learn, show and teach, show and teach. Now with deep learning, you show less, there's less intervention. It's starting to create, using Skynet, a neural network that that's layered, that starts to do the learning itself. So there's less intervention. But it's that type of processing power takes an enormous amount of processing power. And you got to realize that the context is going to be a smaller box. And the fidelity is going to be beautiful, but it's not going to take as much of the data. So machine learning will ultimately be able to take a ton of data, you teach it. And so this is how we would do it. We had something called a fidget that was on our Revive device. A fidget was a non-education movement. Education movement was raising your hand, was writing. So we were trying to get kids like me who move around all the time. So the more you fidget, the less focused you are in some cases, right? So we had to teach the software. So we actually got kids to sit down and we filmed the kids, legally sign off and the whole bit. Then we showed the machine that, and we started telling the machine, okay, we educated the machine. So the machine could see that. So then now based on the movements, it's accelerometer, it sees the movements based on accelerometers tied to the gravitational pull of the earth, blah, blah, blah. You can start learning that. And it has to see lots and lots and lots of data to learn it. But anyways, that's the thought process here. As you start getting into these things, you start realizing it's not the end all know all, but when you have a situation with a large amount of information, you're looking for certain trends, these systems can be really powerful. Next slide. And machine learning, as I talked about, our brains create the magic, but with machine learning, they process these volumes of information, and they look for those statistical trends. But what you want to watch out for is something called supervised versus unsupervised ML, machine learning. And unsupervised is when you don't have a human look at the results and see whether there was statistical information that was wrong, if something looked like it was out of whack. And we had some problems with facial recognition software and unsupervised machine learning that came out about a year ago that you have to watch out for. And so those are things because they don't have the nuance, the subtext that a human being would have. And then flipping the slide, now you get the idea of the machine learning versus deep learning. Feature engineering is the learning process. Model building is then how it processes after it learns. So the models, the algorithms are deeper and richer in deep learning. There's less testing, but because of that, you ultimately need more processing power. And so we're not quite there yet on the full level of processing power to get the full context of what deep learning can process. So next slide. So some key statistics here. This isn't going away. Some of the best examples, move it one more time. I think GE is one of the best companies to watch as it relates to this. They've gone all in on DX. They're moving further and further away from making appliances to making software that manages appliances. And they're really talking about the self-healing machines. And you're going to be seeing that more and more. Cisco will always be a player in this, but Intel is another company to be looking out for. NVIDIA is another company to be looking out for. And all three car manufacturers, and including Tesla as well, because this will be some of the first implementations of some true AI-based digital transformation technologies will be in the cars coming up here because of safety reasons. There's so many powerful safety things that could occur in car, like the accident that we saw down in Texas, this 45 car pileup. Some of those things could be handled much better with an IoT-based real-time information system that tells your car to stop or automatically makes your car stop, which now that we get into privacy issues associated with that. But this isn't going away anytime soon. Next slide. So you have this virtual circle of technology. You know, applications drive need for stronger infrastructure and technology. Stronger infrastructure and technology drive more powerful applications. We're really back down to that below section right now. If you hit the next slide, what is that 3.0 going to look like? So we have a lot of needs, but we don't have the pure processing power, the pure silicon, the pure, pure technology to start doing some of the really cool, deep learning things that can happen to help us solve, issues like, where should you wear a mask and how you should wear a mask in COVID, or, putting sensors on waste systems so you can pre-test people who have a look-see, and they can you can preemptively put them in isolation based on that. If you hit some next slides, you can hit it again and again. I think you hit 2 more times, please. 1, 2, there you go. So, the infrastructure 2.0, right now we have the Kubernetes in the cloud, and it's there and it's working. These questions about how do we connect the world, ultimately, how do we make sense of our world? How do we learn more about it? What can we do better? Where are some patterns that we can fix some of the major problems we face? Crime data in certain areas that could be overlaid with education data to see if there's some problems within the school district, or overlaid with Medicare information or Medicaid information or welfare, and see if there's problems in the system by which people are given some funds to help them through difficult processes. You can start to overlay and correlate those data points, because what you start seeing is when our brains don't do a really good job of correlation of data. Malcolm Gladwell does a phenomenal job of this, and he starts talking about the effective forecasting issues. The problem with the human brain is that we have cognitive biases that affect our ability to process long-term data in relevant ways. We're very good at adapting over the long term. We're very poor at adapting over the short term, and we're very poor at making good judgments on short-term adjustments. This is why we never buy high. We never buy low. We always buy high. This is why we sell high instead of selling low. And this is why most AI-based stories show the people coming in, the first thing they do is they set up an algorithm to work the stock market. They make millions of dollars, while the rest of us are pulling our hair out.
Yeah. So David, I just want to do a time check. Like we have just like 2 more minutes, and then we can get to maybe some questions and kind of wrap it up from.
Okay, great.
Mm-hmm.
Next slide. So the human size is going to touch all of us in the knowledge working environment, and ultimately in the world itself. That's how deep and pervasive it's going to be. Next slide. You can look over the slide on your own. You can start seeing some of the trends in jobs and job opportunities, but we're already seeing this, the data science trends, the average salary in data science, the average salary for ML, AI professionals. You start seeing some of that. You start looking at, analytics on the human resources side, and you start seeing this as it relates to business analysts and project managers. Your jobs continue to grow. You're growing wonderfully. It's a great place to be. It's just what you're going to be working on is different. And that's what you have to realize, is that you'll always have project managers. We're going to always have business analysts for the foreseeable future, because you cross over art and science. It's just you become better when you start realizing what it is that you have to work on. So those one in those orangey cloud systems are more about how do you take on this understanding to do your job better. Next slide. Some new job classifications and new job titles you can look at. And then finally, real quick here, and you can look at these slides over time. Next slide. One of the most important things you have to do is, as a project manager, you have to start saying to yourself, what are the things that I know that I have to get rid of? And what are the things I have to start learning? And the first thing to learn is you have to learn what to get rid of. The expendable versus the essential, the concept of the power of unlearning. Doctors are getting new data, brand new set of data every 5 years. So they have to unlearn the things that they knew 5 years ago to incorporate the stuff that's coming to face. And you want to go to that doctor that has learned how to unlearn, instead of the doctor that's still using leeches to help you with certain types of medical ailments. And we know some of those doctors, not quite that example, but folks who might not necessarily have gravitated towards that. So ultimately, how valuable is your experience? And this is the fallacy of the God, my brain just fried here. basically the fallacy of sunk cost fallacy, which is the idea I spent all this time and effort to get this experience, so it must be valuable. Economic terms, it's phooey. So just because you have a park hopper to Disney and you get sick at 9 o'clock in the morning doesn't mean you keep going to get more sick because you bought the park hopper. You go home and you get better. And the thing is, unlearning talks about that. The fallacy, the sunk cost, and the highly volatile and ever-changing marketplace is something you have to control. So as you're looking at digital disruption, how are you handling that? Next. Adaptive learning is about putting yourself in a level that is somewhat distressing. So the more you can get into productive distress, the more, creative and thought and more learning you can produce. It sounds kind of weird, like, oh no, I always want to be in that yellow zone. And I could spend an hour just on this slide, I won't. But the thing you want to be thinking about is think about how you learn best. And how do you think about when you learn the deepest? And it's going to be, if you really look at it, when you had a little bit of distress with psychological safety, but yet you were stressed. You were trying to learn something. You had protection, but you had to grasp it. You had to know it. Next slide. These are some tactics to stay in that distress zone. Next slide. Learning amplifiers. You cannot be comfortable and learn. This is the key. And this was one of my unlearnings as an education provider, someone who's been in the education environment for 22 years. It was all about the smile sheet. I had to unlearn that and realize that to help learn, we have to talk about uncomfortable things and things that make us uncomfortable and show examples that stretch us. Next. That's it. So questions, comments, thoughts, and away we go.
Okay. So we're running up on time, but I do want to open up if anyone has a question. But some of the things that I think that we need to think about, and David helped provide some of this for us to think about, is what are 2 to 3 ways that digital transformation impacts how project managers do their work. Again, what are 2 to 3 ways digital transformation is changing the type of projects that project managers work on? And then, where are places project managers can start looking to pull data from to do their jobs better? I know for me in particular, my role very much on the cutting edge of IoT and having to think about this thing and truly being uncomfortable in what you have to learn. So I do like that comment that you said about unlearning. So that is definitely a good thing. So does anyone have any questions? If you want, you can unmute yourself to ask before we go on to some other PMI business.
Thoughts on value, folks? I mean, anything in particular more value than the other? Technology advances pretty fast, but legislation and security lags far behind. Any suggestions on managing risk? Absolutely. That's a phenomenal question. I mean, and there's no real great way to manage risk except for to be prepared and understand what risk you may be taking. And also always remember, Tony, on that question is that there's always a grandfather period. No matter what you're doing, I've never not seen legislation that changes things dramatically where it doesn't give you some grandfathering. And then if you're a smaller company, there's always thresholds where, 50 plus or 15 plus, 50 or lower, 25 or lower companies aren't affected. But so those are the things you want to be thinking about, right? Right now, privacy in California. If you know anything about California privacy laws, you want to be very attuned to what's going on there, especially if your company does a lot in the marketing space, does a lot in the information sharing space. And, California is also a bellwether for other states too. But there's no true suggestion except for education. Find a good resource site that you trust that provides you consistent information, but don't be too scared to attack, because ultimately there's grandfathering sections and you can learn from the stuff that you gain on that. Mm-hmm. So that's a great question.
Yeah, that was that.
Question.
Thank you, Tony. Go ahead.
Hi, this is Lakivia. I was going to put it in the chat, but I want to kind of elaborate. So based on your presentation, I'm understanding really like severe volatility in the workforce all around, just because every organization will probably essentially upgrade their IoT just to be able to remain, valid in this world. So if you don't have a background in IT at all, do you think that now would be the time to find some kind of training in that, or to secure some kind of training in that to remain competitive in the workforce overall?
Yeah, I would tell you absolutely. It's a great way to be thinking about it. So the term I use for this is called career insurance. And like I talked about with the doctors, every 5 years, they have to have
Right.
career insurance by reassessing who they are, what they know, and then the data, how they get it. You have to be thinking about that as well. And there's a lot of great options. I would focus in around maybe the data science, data analytics side of things as a project manager, because it's got good crossover, especially if you have strong Excel skills and your attention to detail is pretty solid. And you don't need to have a ton of IT specific information. You just have to have a ton of data and understanding how to process data using some IT tools.
Right.
Now, if you want to get a little bit deeper, the best career insurance possible right now is learning some type of, understanding the architecture of code, the coding process. If you can learn how to code in R, if you can learn how to code in Python, those are two that are going to be very cross-referenceable over into some of the stuff you folks do. But if you can at least understand what it means to code, how does code operate, the environment it operates within, what does it do? And then the third would be if you want to start learning a little bit more about cloud and cloud function and cloud operation. What is that? How does that operate? What are some of the service providers there? I mean, those are three generic areas, but all three could help you out. You don't have to learn all three. But the easiest, not the easiest because data science is hard, but the one that has the most cross reference to project management work is data analytics.
Perfect. Thank you for that information.
No problem.
No, thank you, thank you. And I know we're running, quite a little bit past our normal cutoff time, but I think it was a great conversation, great questions, and don't worry if fill out the survey. And I put the survey link in here, Marissa. I know we had a couple of other slides, so let's kind of go through that. So want to make sure that there are other meetings for this month. Please go out to the PMI METROLINA website and do that. But we do have a technical one coming up, virtual data, tell me my story, or tell my story. And then we also have some ACMP stuff. We all then look, what is it? Oh, dream wide and awake, overcome what limits you to excel in your life. And then the one at the end of the month is project management essentials for project managers. So please go out and look at those. Pretty good topics and some great speakers. Go to the next slide. But here is our survey. I did put the link in the chat, but you can click on the QR code and take the survey, because if you want to hear more about IoT and things like this, please let us know, or what other topics that you might want to hear. That is how we grow and learn and provide you the best quality of presentations. So wanted to make sure that we got that all out there. Is there anything, Rhonda, that I left off? Oh yes, the PMI METROLINA mentoring program. Thank you, Marissa. There is a program out there, and there is some information on the program as far as signing up to be part of that. And oh, somebody did ask about the slides. I saw that. The slides will be sent out in an email afterwards, along with a link to the recording, which will be posted out there on, I believe, YouTube, correct, Rhonda?
Yep, we'll send in. Yep, great job, David, as always. And David
Thank you.
is our speaker at the end of the month too, so we get him twice this month. So,
Yeah, project management essentials is a fun one. You start
Yeah.
getting into product mindset changes.
Absolutely, yeah. Thank you so much. And no, I think you covered everything. And again, we do appreciate your feedback and look at each survey very diligently and make sure that we can apply it across the community. So thank you so much.
And one thing David just said, his last one is talking about mindset change, which is just what he mentioned on this IoT, that we always have to have the mindset change. So that would be a very good one to also, attend to be able to help us understand how to change our mindset. Thank you, David, very much. And thank you everyone for staying over the extra 5 minutes. I do apologize. We try to end right on time, but today we went over just a little.
That was my fault. I do apologize. I got too excited.
No, that's okay. It's part of the subject and topic too. So it's, it goes. Thank you all very much.